The congressional chamber froze in silence as former Attorney General Bill Barr leaned toward his microphone, his cheeks flushed crimson with fury. "Representative Crockett!" he snapped, his tone sharp enough to slice through the air. "What you just claimed is pure fiction. You are lying to the American people, and I will not sit here and allow it." But Jasmine Crockett, the first-term Congresswoman from Texas, didn't so much as blink. Instead, the faintest smirk tugged at her lips as she reached for a manila folder that had been sitting untouched in front of her. Within moments, that folder would unleash a political shockwave powerful enough to rattle Washington's foundations and leave one of its most entrenched figures utterly speechless. This wasn't routine oversight. This was a historic confrontation, a 42-year-old newcomer about to drag decades of hidden truths into the light. The documents she carried weren't just evidence. They were dynamite, capable of shattering Barr's carefully constructed reputation and rewriting his legacy. Before we step into this showdown, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell, because what unfolded here has already been called one of the most devastating congressional takedowns in modern history. And drop a comment with where you're watching from. This story is about to shake the political world. William Barr had long been a towering figure of the Washington elite. At 73, he had served as Attorney General not once, but twice, first under George H.W. Bush, then under Donald Trump. A Yale-trained lawyer with credentials steeped in conservative power circles, Barr had maneuvered through the corridors of power for over 40 years. Known for his calm under fire, his mastery of legal doublespeak, and his unrelenting defense of presidential authority, he embodied Washington's old guard. But across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, a freshman lawmaker with no interest in playing by the establishment's rules. At 42, she carried with her the grit of a Texas trial lawyer who had cut her teeth as a civil rights attorney and public defender. She wasn't born into privilege or Ivy League pedigrees. She built her career fighting for people the system ignored, wielding evidence like a sword against the powerful. And today, she was prepared to use those same skills against one of the most formidable men in American politics. Officially, the hearing was about the Justice Department's handling of investigations during the Trump years. But everyone in that packed room understood the real stakes, whether decades of backroom deals and hidden maneuvers would finally come to light. For Barr, this was supposed to be a redemption tour, a chance to rewrite history, smooth over the chaos of the Trump era, and emerge with his legacy intact. He came armed with polished talking points and a strategy built on stonewalling, deny, deflect, and survive the sound bites. But what he hadn't counted on was Crockett's relentless preparation. She and her team had worked late into countless nights, chasing paper trails, digging through forgotten archives, and piecing together a case sharp enough to cut through Barr's defenses. She knew the risks. Challenging a man like Barr could make her a target of Washington's unforgiving establishment. But some truths, she believed, were worth any career cost. The room was electric with anticipation. Reporters packed every corner, cameras rolled, and political aides whispered nervously behind their bosses. C-SPAN broadcasted each second live to the nation, while Twitter lit up with hashtags like Not Barr Hearing and H. Crockett vs. Barr. Everyone could sense something extraordinary was about to unfold, but no one could predict just how explosive the collision would become. For the first hour, Barr danced the same dance he had perfected for decades, offering selective answers, hedging with legal jargon, and retreating behind his familiar shield. "I don't recall." He repeated the phrase like a mantra, steady and unflinching, until Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, opened that folder, and locked eyes with him. The air grew heavy. The balance of power in that room was about to shift. Crockett leaned forward, her tone calm but razor-sharp. "Mr. Barr, in your previous testimony before this committee, you insisted you had no knowledge of any pressure placed on prosecutors in the Roger Stone case. Do you still stand by that statement?" Barr shifted slightly in his chair, face unreadable. "Representative, as I've said before, the decisions in that matter were based solely on prosecutorial judgment and the pursuit of justice." Crockett slid a paper from her folder, her eyes never leaving him. Interesting, because in my hand I have an email dated February 11th, 2020, sent by the lead prosecutor in that very case. Would you like me to read it aloud? A flicker of unease flashed across Barr's face, though he quickly tried to mask it. I'm not aware of the email you're referring to, Representative. There were countless communications at that time. Crockett's voice hardened. This particular email states, and I quote, "The Attorney General's office has made it clear that the sentencing recommendation must be reduced. This directive is coming directly from the top. Does that refresh your memory, Mr. Barr?" Barr leaned forward, his jaw tightening. You're taking things out of context. The department routinely reviews sentencing recommendations. Out of context? Crockett shot back, her eyes flashing. Mr. Barr, 4 career prosecutors withdrew from the case. 4. These weren't political appointees, they were professionals who served under both Republican and Democratic administrations. Are you telling this committee their resignations were just a coincidence? The room went still. Only the rapid clicks of camera shutters broke the silence. Every pair of eyes zeroed in on Barr as he searched for an escape route. Representative Crockett, he began slowly. I understand you're new to Congress, but hurling reckless accusations without proper foundation, inexcusable? Crockett cut him off, her voice rising just enough to command the room. Mr. Barr, I'm not throwing around accusations. I'm reading from evidence, documents provided by your former colleagues. Are you calling them liars? And then Barr made his critical misstep. Whether driven by frustration, arrogance, or the shock of being cornered, he leaned into the microphone and declared, Representative Crockett, this performance is exactly what I'd expect from someone with your lack of experience. You're lying. You're fabricating evidence for political theater. And frankly, it's beneath this institution. Gasps rippled through the hearing room. Democrats froze in disbelief. Republicans shifted uneasily in their seats, and the chairman raised his gavel to restore order. Before he could strike it, Crockett lifted her hand. Mr. Barr, she said, her voice now cold and deliberate, did you just accuse me of lying? Did you just suggest I would falsify evidence in front of this committee? Barr realized too late that he had gone too far. Yet instead of retreating, he doubled down. I'm saying what you're presenting is a distortion of the facts. And yes, I believe you know it's a distortion. If that makes you a liar, then so be it. The gallery exploded in chaos. The chairman slammed his gavel for order as cameras whirred furiously. Through it all, Crockett remained composed, that faint, knowing smile tugging at her lips again. She calmly reached for another folder, this one thicker, stamped with official Justice Department seals. Mr. Chairman, she said over the commotion, I request a short recess. It seems Mr. Barr may wish to reconsider his words, especially once he sees what I'm about to submit into the record. The chairman, a veteran of countless political battles, immediately recognized the weight of the moment. The committee will stand in recess for 15 minutes, he announced, striking the gavel firmly. As the room broke into buzzing clusters, the tension only deepened. Barr's lawyer rushed to his side, whispering urgently. Republican members circled protectively, their faces tight with concern. Across the aisle, Crockett quietly organized her stack of files. Calm, methodical, prepared. There were no celebrations on her side of the room. Just the stillness of a woman who knew the real strike was yet to come. In the press gallery, reporters pounded furiously at their keyboards. Headlines blared within seconds. Barr accuses Representative Crockett of lying in explosive clash. On social media, hashtags lit up, Barr meltdown and Crockett has receipts. Cable networks cut away from regular programming to play the fiery exchange on loop. But the most revealing sign wasn't in the headlines or hashtags. It was at the witness table, where William Barr, once a picture of unshakable confidence, now sat pale, tense, and visibly rattled. The storm was only beginning. The man who had once radiated control now sat hunched at the witness table, pale and shaken, rifling nervously through notes with his lawyer. Only minutes earlier, his face had burned with indignation. Now it was drained of color. More than once, he shook his head slowly, as if struggling to accept what was happening. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett stood near a window, her gaze fixed on the Washington Monument rising in the distance. An aide approached, showing her something on a phone. She nodded once, spoke quietly, then returned to her stack of papers. No self-congratulation, no smug gestures, just the calm precision of a woman preparing to alter the trajectory of history. Whispers slithered through the chamber as the recess stretched on. Veteran journalists compared notes. "I'm hearing she's got whistleblower documents," one reporter murmured. "No, my source says it's deleted emails," another countered. A third leaned in. "Whatever it is, just look at Barr. I've never seen him like this." And indeed, the contrast was striking. This was the same man who had sparred with Robert Mueller, stared down critics of the Mueller report, and brushed off accusations of politicizing the Justice Department. Yet here he was, visibly unsettled. He reached for his phone several times, thumb hovering over the screen as though to make a call, then set it back down without dialing. On the Republican side of the dais, unease spread quickly. Members whispered urgently among themselves, eyes darting between Barr and Crockett. One senior lawmaker was overheard muttering, "We need to know what she's holding before this goes any further." But Crockett wasn't sharing her hand with anyone. Seated at her desk, she jotted notes onto a yellow legal pad, politely brushing off colleagues who approached. This was her moment, and nothing would pull her focus. When Chairman Johnson finally brought the hearing back to order, the atmosphere had completely changed. What had begun as routine oversight now felt like live, unfolding political theater. Every major network had cut to wall-to-wall coverage. Breaking news banners scrolled endlessly across TV screens. "Mr. Barr," Crockett began, her voice steady, no longer heated but sharp and prosecutorial, as if she already knew how the story would end. "Before the recess, you accused me of lying, of fabricating evidence. I'll give you one chance to withdraw that claim." Barr's response bore the fingerprints of hurried coaching during the break. His words were careful, but his jaw remained locked. "Representative, I stand by my statement that your characterization is inaccurate and misleading." Crockett gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Very well. Mr. Chairman, I move to enter into the record a series of documents that will make perfectly clear who is misleading this committee." She lifted the thick folder. The sound of camera shutters filled the room like rainfall. "Let's begin here," she said, laying out a single sheet. "A memo dated January 30th, 2020. From your own files, Mr. Barr, a memo that by Justice Department procedure should have been preserved, but somehow never made it into the official record. Would you like me to read it aloud?" Barr's attorney shot up immediately. "Mr. Chairman, we object. We haven't been given the opportunity to review these so-called documents," Crockett cut in, her tone like a scalpel. "Objection. These records were obtained through lawful FOIA requests and verified whistleblower disclosures. They bear Mr. Barr's own signature, unless, of course, he wants to suggest he didn't sign his own memos." The chairman turned to Barr. "Mr. Barr, are you disputing the authenticity of your signature?" Every eye in the room bore down on him. He was trapped. To deny it meant triggering a forensic review that could unravel him completely. To acknowledge it meant conceding the document was real. "I would need to see the document," Barr said carefully. "Of course," Crockett replied smoothly. She signaled to an aide who carried a copy to his table. All eyes followed as Barr took the page. His face grew paler with every line he read. While he stared down at the memo, Crockett turned squarely to the cameras. "For the American people watching, let me share what this memo says." She held up her copy for the cameras. In Mr. Barr's own handwriting, "Spoke with POTUS about Stone sentencing. He wants it handled delicately. Need to find a way to reduce without appearing to intervene directly." The room detonated. Committee members erupted into overlapping arguments. Reporters shouted into phones. The chairman's gavel pounded for silence, but the damage was done. The chamber fell silent, every eye fixed on Barr. He sat frozen, the paper trembling in his grip. "But wait," Crockett said, her voice slicing through the quiet. "We're not finished." For the next 10 minutes, she moved with surgical precision, unveiling document after document, each one more damning than the last. A text message between Barr and a senior White House aide discussing how to spin the Mueller findings before the report ever saw daylight. An email in which Barr ordered subordinates to actively prop up the president's stance in ongoing criminal probes. Then came the recording, yes, a recording, of Barr's own voice declaring, "I don't care what the career prosecutors think. This is what must be done." With every revelation, Barr seemed to shrink deeper into his seat. His lawyer stopped objecting altogether, knowing that every protest only amplified the damage. "Mr. Barr," Crockett said at last, her words sharp as steel, "you sat here and called me a liar. You accused me of fabricating evidence. Yet every single document I've shown, every signature, every instruction, every recording is yours. So tell us again, who exactly is misleading the American people?" Barr finally spoke, but the thunder in his voice was gone. "Representative, these documents are being taken completely out of context. The president has the constitutional authority to— To what, Mr. Barr?" Crockett cut him off, eyes blazing. "To meddle in prosecutions of his allies? To turn the Department of Justice into the president's personal law firm? Because that's precisely what these papers show. And let me remind you, they were created after you swore under oath that no such interference had occurred. Which means you didn't just mislead Congress once. You did it over and over while holding the highest law enforcement office in the nation." But she wasn't done. She leaned forward, voice steady, measured. "Mr. Chairman, I have one final document." Barr's head snapped up, genuine alarm flickering across his face. "This one isn't from his time under President Trump. It's from his first tenure, under President George H.W. Bush." The room stirred. "You see, Mr. Barr has a pattern," Crockett continued. "This 1992 memo shows him engaging in the very same conduct, political meddling in prosecutions, misleading Congress, and covering it up. The difference then was that we didn't have emails or text messages, just memos. And here," she held it up, "is one in which Mr. Barr wrote, and I quote, 'Congress doesn't need to know everything we do. Executive privilege covers a multitude of sins.'" She locked eyes with him. "A multitude of sins, Mr. Barr, your words, not mine." What followed would etch itself into Washington's history. William Barr, the man long seen as unshakable, the guardian of presidential power, sat speechless. For decades, he had faced down prosecutors, journalists, and senators alike. But now, at the witness table, his gaze sank to the polished wood before him. When he finally raised his head, the bravado was gone. What remained was something that looked a lot like defeat. "Representative Crockett," he began, barely audible. The entire room leaned forward. I would like to consult with my counsel." "Of course, Mr. Barr," Crockett replied, her voice unexpectedly soft. "But before you do, let me make one thing clear. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. It isn't about political points. It's about the soul of our justice system. When the Attorney General of the United States lies to Congress, when he twists the independence of prosecutors for political gain, he doesn't just violate his oath. He betrays every American who still believes in the rule of law." She stacked her documents carefully, one by one. "You called me a liar, Mr. Barr, but your own words, your own orders, your own voice, they tell the real story." The story of an attorney general who pledged loyalty to a president, not to the Constitution. The hearing room erupted in whispers, shock, disbelief, even a touch of awe. Republicans who had come armed to defend Barr sat stone-faced. Democrats tried to hide their satisfaction. The chairman finally spoke, his tone heavy with gravity. "Given the seriousness of the evidence presented, this committee will need time to review these documents in full. Mr. Barr, you remain under oath, and we will require your return for further testimony. Until then, this hearing is recessed." The gavel struck, and the room exploded in murmurs that would ripple far beyond Capitol Hill. Chaos erupted the instant the gavel dropped. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions that drowned one another out. Barr's security team swooped in, shielding him as they hustled him toward a side exit, his lawyer scurrying at his heels. To anyone watching, it looked less like an orderly departure and more like a retreat. Crockett, by contrast, remained composed. She sat still for a beat, steadying herself, then rose calmly into the storm of cameras and colleagues that swarmed around her. Her statement was brief, deliberate. "The documents speak for themselves. The American people deserve the truth, and today they got it." Within minutes, the hearing's dramatic finale detonated across social media. Crockett destroys Barr surged to the top trending slot worldwide. The viral clip of Barr sneering that she was a liar, followed by Crockett's devastating takedown, was shared millions of times before the hour was out. Posts poured in. Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass. "Keep that same energy," one viral tweet declared, racking up hundreds of thousands of likes. Another read, "Barr really thought he could intimidate a black woman who was a public defender? Sir, she's faced tougher fights before her first cup of coffee." Memes exploded. Someone scored Crockett's dismantling of Barr to thunderous superhero music. Another edited every flicker of panic across Barr's face to the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme. But beneath the humor, the gravity of what had been revealed dominated the conversation. Legal experts filled cable news panels parsing the implications. The phrase perjury charges began circulating with mounting frequency. By evening, Washington's landscape had shifted. 3 Republican senators who had stood as Barr's defenders suddenly issued carefully worded statements. Senator Johnson of Wisconsin wrote, "The evidence presented today raises serious questions that demand answers. No one is above the law, regardless of position or party affiliation. Even more telling than those defections was the silence from Barr's other usual allies." At the White House, the press secretary could muster only, "We're reviewing the testimony and have no comment at this time." For an administration that thrived on counterpunches, the quiet was deafening. Democratic leaders, meanwhile, fought to temper their visible excitement while pressing for action. Speaker Martinez held a late-night press conference, announcing a formal House investigation into Barr's testimony, with referrals to the Justice Department for possible perjury. "What we witnessed today was not simply the exposure of lies," she declared. "It was a pattern of corruption at the very top of our justice system that cannot and will not be ignored." By nightfall, the Justice Department itself stood on uncertain ground. Attorney General Sandra Phillips issued a cautious statement pledging to review the evidence and act if warranted. Everyone understood the weight of that. The possibility of DOJ prosecuting a former Attorney General for crimes committed while in office. On legal shows across the networks, prosecutors and analysts debated the stakes. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Rodriguez put it bluntly, "Based on Representative Crockett's evidence, you're looking at potential charges of perjury, obstruction of Congress, and obstruction of justice. Each carries serious prison time." Even Fox News, which had initially rushed to Barr's defense, began pivoting. Conservative commentator Mark Stevens admitted, "I've defended Bill Barr plenty of times. But if these documents are authentic, and he hasn't denied them, then we're facing a very real problem." While Barr hunkered down with his legal team, Jasmine Crockett was living the defining political moment of her career. Calls flooded her office from constituents, lawmakers, and journalists around the globe. The freshman representative, once dismissed as too inexperienced to tangle with Washington's power players, had just toppled one of the most formidable figures in American politics. That night, she sat across from Rachel Maddow for an exclusive interview. Maddow, visibly exhilarated, asked the question on everyone's mind. "How did you get these documents?" Crockett's reply was calm, measured. "Rachel, there are countless good people inside government who believe in the rule of law. When they see corruption, when they see lies, they want the truth to come out. I simply provided a vehicle for that truth," Maddow pressed. "But you knew what you had when you walked into that hearing. Why let him attack you first? Why let him call you a liar?" Crockett allowed herself the faintest smile. "Because I needed the American people to see who he really is. If I had just unloaded the documents, it would have just looked like another partisan brawl," Crockett explained. "But when he came after me, when he called me a liar while he was the one lying, that revealed his character in a way no document ever could." The interview drew millions of viewers, her steady tone and precise explanations only amplifying her credibility. By midnight, Crockett had gained over 1 million new followers across social media. Commentators buzzed with speculation. Senator Crockett? Attorney General Crockett? The possibilities seemed endless. Meanwhile, Republican leadership scrambled into crisis mode. Barr had long been one of their crown jewels, A legal warrior they showcased as proof of conservative intellectual muscle. Now they faced the impossible task of distancing themselves without admitting they'd been wrong to defend him for so many years. The deepest crack appeared when Senate Majority Leader Mitchell, unaware of a live mic, muttered to a colleague, "We should have seen this coming. The signs were there. We just ignored them because he was on our team." That slip detonated through conservative media. Talk radio hosts who'd spent years shielding Barr now scrambled for cover. "We trusted him," one fumed on air. And he betrayed that trust, but others seized the moment. A block of younger Republicans issued a joint statement demanding a new era of conservative leadership that prizes principles over personalities, pointedly commending Crockett for her commitment to transparency and accountability. Values, they insisted, that should transcend party lines. Then, 3 days after the hearing came another earthquake. 2 Justice Department whistleblowers stepped into the public eye, confirming themselves as the sources of many of Crockett's documents. Both were career prosecutors, veterans of multiple administrations. Their decision to reveal themselves transformed the story overnight. In a joint 60 Minutes interview, one spoke through a shaking voice. "We swore an oath to the Constitution. When the man charged with defending that oath broke it, we couldn't stay silent. The system failed, so we had to act." The second, a hardened prosecutor with 30 years' service, was more blunt. Bill Barr corrupted the Department of Justice and turned it into a political weapon. Representative Jasmine Crockett gave us the platform to expose it. Their testimony ignited fierce debate over whistleblower protections and the moral duty of public servants. Soon after, more Justice Department employees began stepping forward with stories of political interference under Barr's watch. 5 days after the hearing, Barr finally tried to reclaim the narrative. He published a Wall Street Journal op-ed titled "The Truth About My Service," a sprawling attempt to recast the evidence Crockett had revealed. But the move backfired. Fact-checkers shredded his claims. Even conservative outlets balked. "Barr's defense reads like the excuses of a man who knows he's been caught," the National Review declared. "It's time for him to stop digging." Worse still, Barr's own former colleagues turned against him. Several ex-Justice Department officials publicly contradicted his account. In a particularly scathing statement, a former Deputy Attorney General wrote, "I can no longer stay silent. The documents Representative Crockett presented are accurate, and they represent only a fraction of the troubling conduct I witnessed." The Crockett-Barr showdown quickly transcended politics. It carried cultural weight, symbolizing generational change, fresh voices challenging entrenched power, and the simple truth that preparation and evidence could topple intimidation. Universities began using the hearing as a teaching case in political science and law. The Crockett method became shorthand for meticulous preparation against powerful adversaries. Young women, especially women of color, saw in her performance proof that confidence paired with facts could dismantle even the most formidable opponents. The phrase, "but she dropped evidence," that ended him became a viral rallying cry, wielded online whenever hypocrisy was exposed. Merchandise followed. Shirts and mugs bearing Crockett's face and the line, "I brought receipts," sold out within days. The ripple effects only widened. The Justice Department announced a sweeping review of every prosecutorial decision made under Barr, with dozens of politically tainted cases potentially set to reopen. At the same time, a bipartisan coalition. In the wake of the scandal, Congress introduced the Prosecutorial Independence Act, a landmark reform that would make it a felony for any political appointee to interfere in prosecutorial decisions. Jasmine Crockett became the face of the movement, championing the bill with precision and passion. Her follow-up hearings drew record audiences, and she even managed to forge unlikely alliances with Republicans who sincerely wanted change. As Crockett's star rose, William Barr's world collapsed. Speaking invitations evaporated overnight. His lucrative book deal was torn up. Corporate boards quietly demanded his resignation. The man who once commanded $50,000 per speech was suddenly toxic, persona non grata. The legal community he had dominated for decades turned its back. The Federalist Society scrubbed his name from its roster of distinguished speakers. At the Department of Justice, his portrait, once displayed prominently in the main hall, was quietly relocated to a dim back corridor. Former colleagues who had long defended him now kept their distance. One ex-Supreme Court clerk, who had worked closely with Barr, confessed to a reporter, "The Bill Barr exposed in that hearing is not the man I thought I knew. Either he changed or I was blind. Either way, it's devastating." The hearing's impact rippled far beyond U.S. borders. For allies who had grown skeptical of America's commitment to the rule of law, Crockett's triumph was proof that the system still had teeth. The European Union's Justice Commissioner issued a statement praising Crockett and the whistleblowers who had ensured that truth triumphed over power. Authoritarian states, however, tried to weaponize the scandal for their own purposes. A Chinese state newspaper sneered, "American democracy is just as corrupt as any other system." But the spin largely fell flat. To most observers, Barr's downfall wasn't evidence of corruption. It was evidence that democracy, while flawed, still contained mechanisms for accountability. The reckoning reached American newsrooms, too. Journalists who had once parroted Barr's words without question now faced uncomfortable truths. On a popular media podcast, a veteran political reporter admitted, "We gave him the benefit of the doubt when we shouldn't have. Representative Crockett did the work we should have been doing." That moment of humility sparked an industry-wide debate about access, journalism, the tendency of reporters to avoid challenging powerful sources for fear of losing access. Within weeks, several major outlets announced tougher policies on verifying official claims, regardless of party or position. Meanwhile, Crockett stayed disciplined. She rejected most interview requests, appearing only when it advanced her reform agenda. Asked about political ambitions, she deflected with ease. "I'm focused on doing the job the people of Texas sent me here to do." But behind the scenes, she was building, methodically, relentlessly. She partnered with Senator Elizabeth Warren on financial transparency bills, teamed up with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on environmental justice, and even found common ground with Republicans on government accountability. Her once tiny staff was suddenly overwhelmed with resumes from some of the brightest minds in law and policy. She chose carefully, balancing youthful idealism with the hardened wisdom of veterans. "We're not here to make noise," she reminded her team. "We're here to make change." 6 weeks after the hearing, the other shoe dropped. The Justice Department announced a criminal investigation into Barr's testimony before Congress. The appointment of a special prosecutor signaled how serious it was. Former Judge Maria Santos, a woman celebrated for her meticulousness and complete immunity to political pressure, was tapped to lead the probe. Her reputation was such that even Barr's allies conceded she would run a fair, no-nonsense investigation. Barr's legal team mobilized immediately, hiring the most expensive white-collar defense lawyers in Washington. The irony was impossible to ignore. The man who had once overseen high-profile prosecutions was now preparing his own defense. The Crockett-Barr showdown became the spark for a much larger reform wave. Other congressional committees began scrutinizing sworn testimony with new rigor. Whistleblower protections were expanded. Secure reporting channels were created to shield government employees from retaliation. And the Crockett Protocols, set of best practices for document preservation and transparency, quickly spread across federal agencies as an informal but powerful new standard. The cultural effects were just as profound. Inspired by Crockett's example, thousands of young people flooded into public service. Law school applications spiked, with many applicants explicitly citing the hearing as their motivation. For a new generation, accountability was no longer an abstract principle. It was a calling. Law school applicants across the country began citing the hearing in their personal statements. "She showed us that one person, armed with courage and preparation, can take on the entire system," wrote one. A year later, the shockwaves were still visible. William Barr had been indicted on charges of perjury and obstruction of Congress. His trial loomed just months away, with legal experts openly predicting conviction based on the mountain of evidence Crockett had unearthed. Crockett, meanwhile, had become one of the most influential members of Congress, even though she was still in her first term. She now chaired a newly formed subcommittee on government accountability and had already shepherded 3 major reform bills into law. Speculation swirled about her future. The Senate? The White House? She brushed it aside. On the anniversary of the hearing, she took to the House floor in a speech broadcast live across every major network. "A year ago," she began, "I was called a liar by a man who built his career on lies. Today, we've proven that truth, when backed by evidence and courage, will always triumph over deception and intimidation. But our work is not done. There are still those who believe themselves untouchable, who think power shields them from accountability. To them, I say, we are watching, we are documenting, and we will hold you accountable." The American people deserve nothing less. The clash between Jasmine Crockett and William Barr quickly took its place as one of the most consequential congressional hearings of the 21st century. It reshaped how Congress wields oversight, how the Justice Department operates, and how Americans imagine accountability. For Crockett, it marked the beginning of what many believe will be a historic career. She had shown that preparation, courage, and an unshakable commitment to truth could dismantle even the most entrenched power structures. Her example inspired a generation to enter public service, convinced that they, too, could make a difference. For Barr, it was a complete collapse. Once hailed as one of the most powerful attorneys general in modern history, he now faced the prospect of ending his life behind bars. His legacy, once tied to conservative legal theory and executive power, would instead be remembered for corruption, deception, and the day a freshman congresswoman exposed him before the nation. Even years later, the aftershocks continued. The reforms born of that hearing permanently altered how government operates. The culture of impunity that once allowed officials to lie to Congress without consequence was shattered. The Crockett Standard, thorough preparation, documentary evidence, and fearless questioning became the benchmark for congressional oversight. Law schools built full courses around the hearing, dissecting both its legal and political dimensions. Clips of Barr sneering liar at Crockett, only to have his credibility demolished, became some of the most studied footage in modern political history. Scholars wrote volumes on how the exchange shifted Washington's balance of power. The old boys network that had shielded figures like Barr for decades was exposed and weakened. In its place, new voices, especially women and people of color, moved from the margins to the center. But beyond politics, the hearing revealed something deeper about America itself. That courage, when fused with preparation and evidence, can topple arrogance and corruption. It proved that no one is above the law when citizens demand accountability. Jasmine Crockett had entered that hearing room as an underestimated freshman representative. She left as a national champion of justice. Her courage continues to inspire others to challenge lies and corruption in their own communities. William Barr entered believing his power and prestige would shield him. He left disgraced, exposed as a man who betrayed his oath of office. His downfall became a cautionary tale for every official tempted to abuse their authority. The truth always surfaces, and no title can protect you forever. The story of Barr branding Crockett a liar, only to be undone by the evidence she wielded, has transcended politics. It endures as a modern morality tale, a reminder that truth and justice, though delayed, cannot be denied. For young people, it is proof that one determined voice can spark change. For those in power, it is a warning. Somewhere, someone is keeping receipts on behalf of the American people. The hearing was more than a scandal. It was a reckoning, a moment of redemption for the democratic system itself. It proved that the mechanisms of accountability, though often slow and imperfect, can still deliver justice when citizens have the courage to activate them. The confrontation lasted only a few hours, but its impact will reverberate for generations. It showed that in the battle between truth and lies, courage and intimidation, evidence and empty accusation, truth, when armed with proof, will always prevail. Democracy demands more than faith. It demands vigilance. It demands that citizens stand up to power, demand accountability, and refuse to accept deception, no matter how high the office or how intimidating the figure. The lesson of Jasmine Crockett versus William Barr is simple but profound. Prepare relentlessly. Stand fearlessly, and never allow title or power to silence the truth. Because in the end, as Crockett proved that day, truth backed by evidence is the most powerful weapon of all. If this story moved you, share it. Keep pushing for accountability. Stay engaged. Because they may hold the power for a season, but as Jasmine Crockett showed the nation, we hold the truth.